And so some of the questions John poses when trying to evaluate should we stock something or should we not, um, is this a critical item that has to be available for immediate delivery? Can you find this item on the shelf of one of the competitors? Is the profit margin high enough or so high that you're able to keep it for an extended period and still make money on it? Could we sell another product in its place? And then lastly, for those with multiple locations, is it possible or is it better to put some of these items in a central location and then feed them to the branch as they need them, as opposed to stocking them in all of the branches and carrying more inventory? And so if we think about that process, where can StockIQ be of assistance in that? And when I look at it, I found at least two places, and I think Jeffrey will actually add a third to help evaluate the items. But the first is the ABC XYZ matrix that's in StockIQ. And I would say, simply stated, if you're not familiar with that, it's just using the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule, to organize items in their importance to the business. And this can be a dynamic calculation in that you can tell StockIQ to recalculate it over time at a certain interval, daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, annually, and etc. And so you want to pick the frequency that seems the most appropriate to help make sure things are relevant. And something that's an A today, next month might be a B, or something that's a C now might be an A in a couple months. And then what goes right along with this, and we actually use the same matrix, is assigning an order policy to each of the categories. And we want to match the policy to the ABC category that drives the appropriate behavior. And I guess, again, as a plug for next month, we will be talking about order policies in much more detail next month, so stay tuned. And then I would say normally when you do an ABC XYZ process, items fall most of the time where you would think they would, but there are some that may fall in the category right below or right above, and so you can use order policy overrides to help remedy that if something doesn't fall exactly where you would like it to. So for those of you that aren't as familiar with the ABC stratification method, again, it's using the Pareto principle, and if you look at the A's, they're the items that are very important to the business. B's are important, but not very important. C's are not nearly as important, and D's are really not that important, but oftentimes they're purchased by, your favorite customers, and so you need to keep them on the shelf, even though economically it doesn't make as much sense. N stands for new product, and you determine what new means, if that's 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, 12 months, whatever that is most appropriate for your business. And then lastly, the X category is just represents items that have not sold in the last 12 months. And there are settings that go along with this. And as I mentioned before, John recommended hits at 100% to rank the items from most important to least important. And that's certainly one way to do it. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But you also have the ability to take into account cost or cost of goods sold, revenue, margin, and quantity sold, or you can blend those. If you add these, have to add up to 100%, and you can choose how best to blend each of those attributes. And then furthermore, you can decide for my A's, I would like those in this example. The A's represent the top 80% of hits. The next 15%, getting all the way up to 95, belong to the B's, and then 4% belong in the C's, and the last 1% of an item's contribution to the hits are the D's. But what happens most often is the number of SKUs in the D category outweighs many of the other categories, or at least that seems to happen often. And then lastly, you get to determine how many categories are in the ABCs. So in this case, it's 4, so we go A through D. And then do you want us to look at 12 months of historical sales, so a backward looking, or do you want to combine that with some forecast and also have a forward looking component of that as well, which is probably more important for the newer items because they don't have as much history. The next part is the XYZ stratification, and this is probably not as well known, but it can be very helpful. And it's another axis on which we can grade our items and hopefully learn something from it. So in this case, if you use usage pattern, which I think is probably the most widely used attribute to do the XYZ on, X is recurring, so these are the items that you sell on a regular basis. Y are sporadic, so you sell them a little bit less frequently. And then Z are slow, which is even less than less frequently. And then N, of course, still stands for new product. Now, the other two are calculations that have to do with how well we predict the usage or the sales of an item. So for instance, forecast model error, the X is a very low forecast error, so we're good at forecasting these items. Y's are medium error, Z's are high error, and N is again new product. And then the coefficient of variation is a different mathematical calculation, but it's essentially trying to say the X in this case is very predictable. Again, we would probably have low forecast error. The Y is sort of predictable, and the Z is not that predictable at all. And really, no matter which one of these you use, they line up, in my mind, very similarly. Recurring demand items are typically easy to forecast because we have lots of data points on them. So that would mean low error, and they tend to be very predictable. The sporadic items have medium error, and they're sort of predictable. And then the Z items that are slow typically also have high error and are not very predictable as it relates to getting a really good forecast on that item. So no matter which one of these you pick, they're all come from the same sort of thought process. So then this is what the matrix would look like, and you'll see something like this in StockIQ. But we have the AXs, so the A is really important to the business, and X is recurring, so this is the bread and butter item. You want as many items in this category, obviously, as possible. And then the level of importance and predictability goes down as you move further down in the matrix. And so the question becomes, especially when you say to stock or not to stock, is which of these categories should you stock? And so if I flip it, this part isn't in StockIQ specifically. This is just my notion of if I'm looking at these categories and I want to think about them broadly, do I want to stock these items or do I want to maybe offer them to the customer but not keep them in the warehouse because they're too big, too expensive, not bought frequently enough, et cetera, et cetera. And so once you make a decision whether to stock or not to stock a given category, then you can take one more step and say, which order policy do we want to govern this group of items? So as it relates to say, this category, the A and the X, our most important items, we want to use the most sophisticated order policy of order point, and we want to order in EOQ lots when we're buying this particular product, as long as that's commensurate with the mins and the mults that are appropriate for the item. But then maybe on these, we want to do a min-max because we really want to squash what we're going to keep on hand or really keep tight controls over it. And then, of course, the ones that we don't want to stock would get one of the non-stock policies, and buy to order is the most popular one of those, where the only way StockIQ suggests that is if there's a hard sales order in the system to match it to. So with that, thank you for coming. And we've certainly got some time, the both of us, for questions if you've got any. We had a good one earlier about item-centric versus customer-centric. But if there are others, please let us know.